I was going to ask about doing the two roles of you're both an academic and an activist, and how does it to negotiate these two roles? Do you sometimes feel pulled in different directions?
It is a difficult job in the sense, one thing is that many times because of the caste stigma and because there's so much, because in interacting with Indian diaspora here, because we're 80 to 90% of them come from upper caste backgrounds.
Mm.
Many times, identifying yourself as a Dalit is one really needs a courage. I know a lot of Dalits here, both in America and Canada, who do not want to come out as a Dalit because they think you will be stigmatized and you will be um, mistreated, sort of thing. So, but one thing is that I'm an academic, and most importantly, I'm a very politicized academic. So I made it a point that my achievement, my whatever I do should become a role model to people of my community and others who want to advocate for social justice and and equality. So in this context, it's a conscious, because one thing is that what I write needs to have meaning in terms of what happens on the ground. So I see my what I'm doing, like both as an academic and even in classroom, I actively talk about my research and also my activism and what I do, because that's the only way I can educate people and also spread message about my community and my histories. So in this context, I see that they are not diverse. Like I don't want to see that they are different, but actually, though it's a very difficult journey to make, but I consciously chose that my writings should speak the way I talk and the way I involve in community. And that's why I write on Dalit Bristle, because it is not just a career, it's basically it's a larger emancipatory struggle on which I am basically every day engaged. So like tenure and promotion, these are all they're all part of my career development, but that career would not have been meaningful but for what I come, where I come from. So, and if I really want to make it meaningful, I must make it speak both ways, both as an activist and also as an academist. Only in Delhi there is one center for Dalit studies, which basically headed by this very famous Dalit academic again, Professor. He was a former chairman of UGC. So that is in Delhi. It's an autonomous research institute. But now I think Dalit studies. In fact, there was a first international Dalit studies conference held in 2008 at University of Pennsylvania. And after that conference, the friends who basically organized published this first volume by Duke University Press called Dalit Studies. I
Okay.
think that is the beginning of a new initiative, particularly internationally, to foreground Dalit studies as a alternative to the mainstream South Asian scholarship.
Okay. I wanted to ask you about a project you're working on, which is a memoir of your mother's life. Can you tell us more about what you're hoping to accomplish and about using memoir as a genre as part of your work?
Yeah, like this again, because after I moved to United States, one of the important thing I learned as a scholar, historian particularly, is that the African American life narratives have really inspired me a lot. Like life narrative as a genre is a very important genre, precisely because it acts as a testimony for historical oppression. The second thing what it does is that life narrative also has a possibility to change the heart of the other, basically the person who is not a Dalit or who is not a black. When you read about the stories of suffering, one of the things, it humanizes the other. That's one of the reasons why I think especially women's biographies or autobiographies, or black autobiographies, or even Dalit, or like why are they important is that the possibility of acting as a testimony and also possibility of changing the hearts of the others. So in this context, Dalit life narratives, particularly 1990s onwards, is a very important genre emerged in India. And in that context, what we see is that, by writing these stories, we are basically paying a way for the historical documentation. The second thing is that, we are also telling the stories of our suffering, not to gain sympathy, but use them as a liberation stories. Like, despite oppression, despite poverty and squalor in which you are trapped in, you always, look for possibilities to escape from them. I think, like, I wanted to write my mother's story precisely because of that, because, as I said in the beginning, that, she is the one basically who had this aspiration to send me to school. And also my mother's life was a unique life precisely because she was dedicated to this local temple in our village. Like, so and she was basically called Jogini, the lady who was married to this goddess. And that means, they don't have husbands. And so in that context, they are exploited many times, and their children do not have father. And it had a lot of burden in terms of being a single mother and, raising a child without a father, and facing all sorts of, both sexual violence and also caste discrimination. And despite all that, she never let me, stop my, my studies. And she always used to tell me that, you should run without looking back. If you look back, you have nothing. So your only thing is that, the only way you can do something in life is that, you run with your life and never look back. And that's what I used to get surprised, like, I never looked back at my life in literal terms also. Because despite, though I lost my mother when I was in my 9th grade, so very early, so I had to struggle myself to educate and go to universities, everything. But one of the lessons I learned from my mother's words is that, never look back.
Yeah.
And that, I think, now I feel that, those words are like very courageous. Like, I know many of my relatives, friends with whom I studied, despite having everything, none of them pursued studies. But here is my mother, not having anything, made it a point that, I should study, and that's the only way I can liberate myself and my family. So that's why, I wanted to tell my story of my mother, because, otherwise, if I don't tell, there's no way that, our story will come out.
And when this book is going to come?
I don't know. I'm still writing. Like, I finished two chapters, so it's really, heavy to write. Like,
Yeah, I understand. It's really, really hard if you are writing yourself.
Yeah, writing myself, and
really,
most importantly, you have to go back and relive those, hard times in life.
yes.
So now, those are all good memories now for me. Like, that is what made me what I am today. But many times what happens is that, it's to recollecting them is like many times it really destabilizes me many times. But, it also empowers me.
Yeah,
The
I
sense,
remember, yeah, when I was under threat and I was trying to write, I asked my daughter to write I want to really write about my mother and my story, but it was very hard for me to even narrate. And I really, you are courageous and you are doing it. It's amazing.
thank you.
It's amazing. Congratulations. And
Thank you.
coming
Thank you.
back to your work as an activist, as a professor, it is most of the time it's really very hard. Tell us about your family or how you take care of yourself, because it's very difficult, because most of the time there are setbacks, it's hard. So tell us about your family and how you cope with tension, how you really keep yourself motivated.
Yeah, like, as African American thinker Ardra Larde, she says very interesting. Self-care is political. Like, if you can't take care of yourself, you can't do politics. And that's one thing. But I'm very fortunate, like, in many ways, though I had a very hard life and I struggled a lot. But I have a very nice family. My wife, basically, whom I met in JNU. So basically, she's very, very not just supportive, Yeah, I always tell people that, I am today what I am today because of my wife. And she basically shares my, aspirations, and, she's, that way, I'm very lucky. Like, though she comes from, we are intercaste marriage and, all those things. But, one thing is that, I'm lucky in finding a person who could really share my, aspirations and my struggles and understand them. So that way, I have a very um, lucky partner, with whom I share. And I have a son who is 15 now, he's in grade 10, who is actually, again, he's very passionate about this social justice issues, and I take him to protest whenever I organize. So we have constant discussion. So he knows about everything is happening in India, and also Dalits and Muslims. So in fact, he also learns, he can speak, reads Arabic. So like, he has this very interesting, interest for him, because of, our own lives, everything. So, and another interesting thing is because I studied in hostels most of the time. So I'm very systematic about, in the sense, I make it a point to take care of myself. Like, I run, I, make it a point to go for walks and runs, and, and so yeah, I try to enjoy, like, because one thing is that, I value what I have, both in terms of life, career, and also time. And I take this every moment of life with lot of, appreciation and also gratefulness. And that's why, I
No,
make,
we have to run because most of the time when we are in rallies or on the protest,
yeah,
police comes after us, so we have to be fit to
yeah,
run.
yeah. That's
Yes.
what, I remember, that's what we used to do in Delhi. Like, once we went to this protest in Delhi, we were in JNU at that time, in front of this AP Bhavan, because so we were all standing, like, protesting and everything. Police were chasing. I
Yeah.
had this very good friend who's again left activist, and then he said, when they are running, just we should go to bus stop and pretend we are looking for a bus. And that was a brilliant idea. All the people were running, and this fellow behaved as though, looking for a bus, and the Lati policeman came and, what are you doing here? He said, we are waiting for a bus for Connaught Place.
Okay.
And he left us. Like, you need to be very, these are all, that's why, like, India, that way, it really teaches you a lot, especially survival. Like,
Yeah, as a man, I understand it's good. You can, as a woman, even in India or in Pakistan, tell us about that. How you feel like even running for in the protests,
yeah.
it's not easy. And being an activist and women activist, how you feel and how you really rate their courage.
Yeah, basically that again, I'm that way, I'm a privileged man. I must acknowledge, again, I really can't really fathom how difficult it is to be either a Muslim activist or a Dalit activist, and especially being a woman. And as you know, the sexual violence, like, one of the important problems, especially in our societies, South Asian societies, is that, women are always shamed for being assertive and being, active, being, one of the important ways in which they do is that, they character assassination.
Yes.
That's the beginning of, attacks on women's, especially active women's political life. And state brutality, again, is unbelievable. Like, police or, any institutional heads, they think, women are not supposed to be political.
Yes.
So, like, that's one of the things, like, like, but one thing, Rehana ji, like, it's unbelievable how this generation, young generation in India, so much hopeful, both men and particularly women.
Yeah.
And they are, dismantling all kinds of power structures in India, taking from sexual, violence to, institutional, this thing, especially after the Me Too movement.
Yes.
And women are really taking, like, it's unbelievable. This is like the most hopeful time. At one level, we see this, umbrella of Hindutva and Hindu
Yeah.
fascism, becoming, shade and under which you live. But otherly, you also see this, little, mushroom sprouting in the form of women's activism.
I
And,
always call them these are islands of hope.
yeah, not just islands. They're not islands. They are like, seas in which these people will be
One
drowned
day it
one
will,
day. Yeah. Like
yes.
they're not, like that's what I feel like, because so much hope. And like that's why whenever I want to get inspiration, I watch these videos, like to understand, we tell ourselves that we are so privileged. Even if we can't speak, there is no meaning for what we are doing.
Yes.
And that's what, like, it's very interesting, like we live in this very interesting times in which younger generations are going to change the course of human history, particularly in the context of South Asia.
Yes.
Can I ask, for a lot of people who are watching this interview, they may be learning about Dalit oppression for the first time. What can people do here in Canada to support the liberation movements?
Yeah, like one thing, because you guys are outside, and because you're not really, it doesn't come into your everyday social context. And
Mhm.
uh, one of the ways in which me talking about Dalits and Dalit suffering and Dalit oppression and also Dalit liberation movements in India is that outsiders, the role of the outsiders is that talk about them.
Mm.
If you meet an Indian, particularly Hindu, ask them about caste system, where they come from, what caste they come from, what do they think about caste, and what do they think about
Mhm.
Dalits. And if outsiders ask innocent people who don't have any idea, asking them, you know puzzles them, and also disturb the privilege of the caste in those who live here and try to pretend that it doesn't exist.
Mhm.
So the only way you can say that, that's how the racism or sexism, right? When
Yes.
you talk about them, you make it as a problem, like recognize that this problem exists. That's the beginning of what we call dialogue. When you recognize that there is a problem, then what happens is that we can have a dialogue for which we can recognize each other's humanity. And at the end of the day, like leave aside religions, races, and sexes, everything. It is this human essence of humanity which needs to be preserved, and every human being deserves a dignity. And it is not a crime to be born as a Muslim or a Dalit or a transgender or indigenous person. We don't choose our birth, but we can choose how we treat others and how we respect others. And that's why the outside community, the only international community responsibility is to recognize this problem and engage, talk about these things. That ask Indians, like where is caste and what actually is happening, where do they stand. you know that I think is the beginning of any sort of social transformation.